The morning sun cast golden rays across the palace courtyard as Princess Charlotte adjusted her navy blue coat. She was only 8 years old, but everyone said she carried herself like someone much older. Her blonde hair was neatly tied back with a simple ribbon, and her shoes were polished to perfection. Today was supposed to be another normal royal ceremony, the kind her parents dragged her to almost every week. Charlotte stood between her two brothers, feeling the weight of the cameras pointing at them. Hundreds of people lined the palace gates, waving flags and trying to catch a glimpse of the royal family. She knew the routine by heart now. Smile, wave, don't fidget, and whatever you do, don't embarrass the family. Her mother had reminded her of these rules just that morning, while helping her get dressed. The ceremony was being held to honor the palace guards who had served for 25 years or more. Charlotte found these events terribly boring, if she was being honest. All the adults would make long speeches about duty and honor, while she had to stand perfectly still. Her feet always hurt by the end, and her face felt tired from keeping that polite smile plastered on. As the ceremony began, Charlotte noticed one guard in particular. He stood in the third row, his red uniform crisp and decorated with several medals. His name tag read James Mitchell, and unlike the other guards who stared straight ahead with blank expressions, this man seemed to be struggling. His face looked pale, almost gray, and tiny beads of sweat were forming on his forehead despite the cool morning air. Charlotte watched him carefully while pretending to pay attention to the speeches. Something was wrong. She could sense it the way you can sometimes feel a storm coming before the clouds appear. The guard's chest was moving up and down too quickly, and his hands were trembling slightly at his sides. He was trying so hard to stand at attention, to maintain that perfect military posture, but his body was clearly betraying him. Her father was in the middle of a speech about dedication and service. People were clapping at all the right moments. Cameras clicked constantly, capturing every moment for tomorrow's newspapers. But Charlotte couldn't focus on any of it. Her eyes kept returning to Guard Mitchell. She noticed his knees beginning to buckle slightly, then straighten again as he fought to stay upright. He was determined not to cause a scene, not to ruin this important ceremony. Charlotte tugged on her mother's sleeve, but her mother gently pushed her hand away without looking down. She was focused on maintaining her own royal composure, nodding along with the speech. Charlotte tried to whisper to her older brother, but he shooshed her with a quick glance. Nobody was paying attention to her concerns. They all assumed she was just being a restless child, bored and looking for attention. The princess felt frustration building in her chest. Why wouldn't anyone listen? She looked back at the guard and her stomach dropped. His face had gone from pale to almost white. His eyes seemed unfocused now, staring at nothing. One of his hands had moved slightly to his chest, a gesture so small that probably only Charlotte had noticed it. He was trying to signal distress without breaking formation, without disrupting the royal event. Charlotte made a decision in that moment. She didn't care about protocol or proper behavior or what the newspapers would say tomorrow. A man needed help, and she was going to make sure he got it. She stepped forward, breaking the perfect line the royal family had formed. Her mother's hand reached out to pull her back, but Charlotte was already moving. "Excuse me," Charlotte said loudly, her young voice cutting through her father's speech. "That guard needs help right now." The entire courtyard went silent. Hundreds of faces turned toward the small princess. Her father stopped mid-sentence, his mouth hanging open in surprise. Her mother's face flushed with embarrassment. The cameras, which had been focused on the podium, all swiveled toward Charlotte. She could feel every eye boring into her, could sense the shock rippling through the crowd. But Charlotte didn't look at any of them. She walked straight toward Guard Mitchell, her small legs carrying her quickly across the platform and down the steps. She could hear hurried footsteps behind her as security personnel rushed to follow, unsure whether to stop her or protect her. The other guards remained frozen in their positions, trained never to move during a ceremony unless ordered. When Charlotte reached Guard Mitchell, she could see he was barely conscious. His eyes rolled slightly and his breathing had become shallow and labored. She looked up at him with concern filling her young face. Up close, she could see he was much older than she'd first thought, probably in his 60s. The medals on his chest represented decades of service to the crown. "Sir, you need to sit down," Charlotte said firmly, reaching out to touch his arm. Her small hand on his sleeve seemed to give him permission to finally admit his struggle. His knees buckled completely and he began to fall forward. "Charlotte, despite being just a child, tried to catch him, her tiny frame bracing against his weight. Several other guards broke formation then, rushing forward to help. They caught Guard Mitchell before he hit the ground and eased him down carefully. One guard immediately began calling for medical assistance on his radio. Another loosened the collar of Mitchell's uniform to help him breathe. Charlotte knelt beside him in her nice coat, completely unconcerned about the dirt on the ground or the grass stains she was getting. "You're going to be okay," she told him softly, holding his hand. "Help is coming. Just breathe slowly." Guard Mitchell's eyes focused on her face for a moment. Despite his obvious pain and distress, something like gratitude flickered across his features. He tried to speak, but Charlotte shook her head. "Don't talk, just rest. You've been standing too long in this heat. It's not your fault." The palace medical team arrived within minutes, rushing across the courtyard with their equipment. They quickly assessed Guard Mitchell and began treating him right there on the ground. Charlotte stayed beside him the whole time, refusing to move even when her mother finally reached her side and tried to pull her away. "Charlotte, you need to come back now," her mother whispered urgently, very aware of all the cameras still recording everything. "Not yet," Charlotte replied simply. "Not until I know he's okay." The paramedics worked quickly and efficiently around Charlotte. They placed an oxygen mask over Guard Mitchell's face and checked his vital signs with various instruments. One of them, a kind-looking woman with gray hair, glanced at the young princess kneeling in the grass and gave her a small, reassuring smile. Charlotte felt slightly better seeing that smile. It meant things weren't as desperate as they had seemed moments ago. Within 10 minutes, Guard Mitchell was being carefully loaded onto a stretcher. His color had improved slightly and his breathing seemed more regular behind the oxygen mask. As the paramedics prepared to carry him away, he reached out and caught Charlotte's hand one more time. She squeezed back gently and he nodded at her before they whisked him toward the waiting ambulance. Only then did Charlotte allow her mother to lead her back toward the platform. The walk back felt much longer than her rush forward had been. Every single person in the courtyard was staring at her. Some faces showed approval, others showed shock, and a few showed clear disapproval at her breach of protocol. Charlotte kept her head high, though. She knew she had done the right thing, regardless of what anyone thought. Her father had resumed his speech, but his heart clearly wasn't in it anymore. He rushed through the remaining remarks and quickly concluded the ceremony. The official photographs that were supposed to happen afterward were canceled. Instead, the royal family was ushered back into the palace through a side entrance, away from the pressing crowd of journalists shouting questions. Once inside the private family quarters, Charlotte braced herself for the scolding she knew was coming. Her parents stood in the sitting room, both looking at her with expressions she couldn't quite read. Her brothers had been sent to their rooms, leaving her alone to face the consequences of her actions. "Charlotte," her father began, his voice stern, "do you understand what you did out there? You interrupted an official royal ceremony. You broke protocol in front of hundreds of people and dozens of cameras. The photographs from today will be in every newspaper tomorrow, and they won't be the ones we planned." Charlotte looked down at her shoes. There were grass stains on them now and a smudge of dirt on her coat. "I'm sorry I interrupted your speech, Father. But that guard was sick. Really sick. Someone had to help him. There are proper channels for these things," her mother added, her voice tight with stress. "The other guards would have noticed eventually. The medical team would have been called. You didn't need to make such a scene." "But nobody was noticing," Charlotte protested, looking up at them with earnest eyes. "I tried to tell you, Mother, but you pushed my hand away. I tried to tell George, but he told me to be quiet. That man could have died while everyone was too busy with protocol and speeches to see he needed help." Her father's expression softened slightly at this. He exchanged a glance with his wife. They both knew their daughter had a point, even if her methods had been unorthodox. Still, as members of the royal family, they had responsibilities and images to maintain. "You're not wrong that he needed help," her father admitted. "But the way you handled it, charging forward like that, drawing all attention to yourself, it wasn't appropriate for someone in your position." "I don't care about my position," Charlotte said quietly. "I care about people. Isn't that what you always tell us? That our job is to serve the people, to care about them? That guard has served our family for decades. The least I could do was make sure someone noticed he was in trouble." Her mother sighed deeply and sat down on the sofa. After a moment, she gestured for Charlotte to come sit beside her. The princess walked over slowly, still expecting punishment. Instead, her mother pulled her into a gentle hug. "You have a good heart, Charlotte," her mother whispered. "Sometimes too good for this life we lead. But you need to learn that there are ways to do things, procedures that exist for reasons." Charlotte hugged her mother back but didn't respond. She didn't regret what she'd done, and she suspected her parents knew that. They could lecture her about protocol all they wanted, but if the same situation happened tomorrow, she would do exactly the same thing. The following morning, Charlotte was proven right about the newspapers. Every single one carried photographs of her rushing to help guard Mitchell. Some of the headlines were critical, calling her unruly and impulsive, but many more were surprisingly positive. "Young princess shows true royal heart," one declared. "Future queen puts compassion before protocol," announced another. Social media, which Charlotte wasn't allowed to use but heard about from the palace staff, had apparently exploded with debate. Thousands of people were praising her quick action and compassion. Many pointed out that she had noticed the guards' distress when all the adults around her had been too focused on ceremony to pay attention. Some people shared their own stories of medical emergencies where someone's quick action had saved a life. Of course, there were critics too. Royal experts appeared on television programs to discuss whether Charlotte's behavior was appropriate. Some argued she had been disrespectful to her father in the ceremony. Others worried she was being raised without proper understanding of royal duty. A few even suggested she needed stricter discipline. Charlotte tried not to pay attention to any of it. She was far more concerned about guard Mitchell. She had asked the palace staff about him first thing that morning, but nobody seemed to know his condition. It frustrated her that she could be the subject of national news coverage, but couldn't get a simple answer about whether the man she'd helped was going to be okay. Finally, around lunchtime, her father called her into his study. Charlotte walked in nervously, unsure if she was about to receive delayed punishment for yesterday's incident, but her father's face was calm, even warm. "I've received word from the hospital about guard Mitchell," he said, gesturing for her to sit down. "He had a heart attack, Charlotte. A significant one. The doctor said if he had remained standing even a few more minutes, trying to maintain his position during the ceremony, he likely would have collapsed completely." The delay in treatment could have been fatal. Charlotte felt her breath catch. "But he's going to be okay now?" "Yes," her father nodded. "Thanks to receiving immediate medical attention, his prognosis is good. He'll need surgery and quite a bit of recovery time, but he should make a full recovery." The doctor specifically mentioned that the quick response saved his life. Tears pricked at Charlotte's eyes, but these were tears of relief. "I'm so glad. I was worried all night." Her father came around his desk and knelt down to be at eye level with his daughter. "Charlotte, what you did yesterday was impulsive and broke numerous rules of royal protocol. As your father and as the king, I should probably continue to reprimand you for that." Charlotte braced herself, but her father continued with a small smile. "However, as a human being who values life above ceremony, I want you to know that I'm proud of you. You saw someone in need and you acted without hesitation. That takes courage, especially for someone your age and especially when it means going against everyone's expectations." Charlotte felt warmth spreading through her chest at her father's words. She had expected disappointment, maybe even anger, but certainly not pride. She threw her arms around his neck and hugged him tightly. For a moment he wasn't the king and she wasn't a princess. They were just a father and daughter who understood each other. "There's more news," her father said when they separated. "Guard Mitchell has asked to speak with you if you're willing. The hospital says he's strong enough for a brief visit. Your mother and I have agreed to take you this afternoon, if you'd like to go." "Yes," Charlotte answered immediately. "I'd very much like to see him." That afternoon, Charlotte found herself in a private hospital room standing nervously by the door while her parents spoke quietly with the doctors outside. She could see guard Mitchell through the window. He was sitting up in bed, no longer gray-faced and struggling. He looked tired but alert, and when he saw her peering through the window, his face broke into a genuine smile. The doctor opened the door and gestured Charlotte inside. "Just for a few minutes," he reminded her gently. "He needs his rest." Charlotte approached the bed slowly. Up close, without his uniform and medals, guard Mitchell looked different. More like someone's grandfather than an intimidating palace guard. His eyes were kind, though, crinkled at the corners from years of smiling. "Your Royal Highness," he began, trying to sit up straighter. Please don't, Charlotte said quickly. You need to rest. And please just call me Charlotte. He chuckled softly at that, then winced slightly, touching his chest. I'm not sure protocol allows for that, but I appreciate the sentiment. I wanted to thank you, young lady. The doctors told me what happened. You saved my life. Charlotte felt her cheeks grow warm. I just noticed you weren't feeling well. Anyone would have done the same. But they didn't, Guard Mitchell said seriously. All those people, all those other guards, your family, the officials, nobody else noticed. Or if they did, they thought ceremony was more important than checking on me. But you saw me. An 8-year-old child saw what dozens of adults missed. He reached out his hand and Charlotte took it carefully, mindful of the various tubes and wires attached to him. I've served the royal family for 32 years, he continued. I've guarded 3 generations of your family. I've stood at attention through rain, snow, heat, and wind. I've always believed in the importance of duty and protocol. But yesterday you taught me something. What's that? Charlotte asked curiously. That compassion matters more than ceremony. That seeing people as human beings, not just parts of a formal event, is what true leadership looks like. You're only 8 years old, but you have the heart of a great queen. Charlotte felt tears threatening again. The newspapers say I was disrespectful, that I embarrassed my family. Some newspapers say that, Guard Mitchell agreed, but many more are singing your praises. And do you know what matters more than either? What you know in your own heart. You did the right thing, Charlotte. Never doubt that. Never let anyone convince you that rules and protocol matter more than human life. They talked for a few more minutes before the doctor indicated it was time for Charlotte to leave. As she reached the door, Guard Mitchell called out to her one more time. Your Royal Highness? Charlotte? When I return to duty, if I'm allowed to return, I hope I might have the honor of being assigned to your personal detail. I'd be proud to serve someone who sees people the way you do. Charlotte smiled at him. I'd like that very much. But only when you're completely better. No rushing back to work. Yes, ma'am, he said with a small salute. The drive back to the palace was quiet. Charlotte stared out the window, watching London pass by in a blur of buildings and people. She was thinking about everything Guard Mitchell had said, about compassion and leadership and seeing people as human beings rather than just figures in a ceremony. Her mother reached over and squeezed her hand. That was a good thing you did visiting him. He clearly appreciated it. He said I have the heart of a queen, Charlotte said softly. He's right, her mother replied, though I hope you'll learn to balance that heart with the wisdom to know when breaking protocol is necessary and when following it serves a greater purpose. That's the difficult part of royal life, knowing when to bend the rules. Over the next few days, the story continued to dominate the news. Videos of Charlotte rushing to help the guard had been viewed millions of times online. People couldn't stop talking about the young princess who had put a man's life ahead of royal ceremony. Letters began arriving at the palace by the hundreds, then by the thousands. Children wrote to say Charlotte was their hero. Adults wrote to share their own stories of times when someone's quick action had made a difference. But there were also difficult moments. Charlotte overheard staff members arguing about her. Some defended her actions passionately. Others worried she was developing a reputation for being difficult and headstrong. One conversation she accidentally heard particularly hurt. 2 advisors were discussing whether she needed special training to better understand her royal responsibilities. Charlotte found herself in her room that evening, feeling confused and a bit lost. She had done what she thought was right. What she knew in her heart was right, but it seemed to have created problems she hadn't anticipated. Being royal was more complicated than she'd realized. Her older brother George knocked on her door and came in without waiting for an answer. He sat on the edge of her bed looking unusually serious for a 10-year-old. I heard some of what those advisors said, he admitted, about you needing special training. Charlotte nodded, not trusting herself to speak without crying. They're wrong, George said firmly. You don't need training to be less caring. If anything, the rest of us need training to be more like you. I was standing right there, Charlotte. I saw that guard too, or at least I could have if I'd been paying attention. But I was too focused on looking proper for the cameras. You weren't worried about how you looked. You were worried about a person who needed help. But Father's speech, Charlotte whispered. I ruined it. Father can give 1,000,000 speeches, George replied. But how many chances do we get to actually save someone's life? You did something real yesterday, something that mattered. A speech is just words. What you did was action. Charlotte hugged her brother, grateful for his support. They stayed like that for a while. Just two royal children trying to understand a world that demanded so much of them. A week after the incident, something unexpected happened. Charlotte's parents invited her to join them for a special meeting. She walked into the conference room to find it filled with palace officials, security personnel, and medical staff. Everyone turned to look at her as she entered, and she felt suddenly very small and very young. Her father gestured to a chair beside him. "Charlotte, these people have been working on something important, and we wanted you to be here when we discuss it." The head of palace security stood up, a tall man named Mr. Thompson whom Charlotte had always found intimidating. But today his face was softer than usual. "Your Royal Highness," he began, "your actions last week have prompted us to review our emergency protocols for royal events. We've realized that we had a significant gap in our procedures. Guards are trained to remain at attention regardless of personal distress, and we had no system in place for them to signal medical emergencies without breaking formation." He clicked. A button and a presentation appeared on the screen behind him. "Thanks to your quick thinking, we're implementing new protocols. Guards will now have a discrete signal they can use to indicate medical distress. We're also stationing medical personnel at every major ceremony, not just nearby but actually visible in the crowd. And we're training all royal family members and staff to recognize signs of medical emergencies." Charlotte listened in amazement. Her one impulsive act had led to all these changes? The palace doctor spoke next. "Additionally, we're implementing mandatory health screenings for all guards before major events, especially those who are older or have any history of health issues. Guard Mitchell's heart condition was in his medical file, but nobody thought to check it before assigning him to stand in the sun for an extended ceremony. That was an oversight we're correcting." One of her mother's advisors, a stern woman named Mrs. Pemberton, who had been among those criticizing Charlotte's behavior, stood up next. Charlotte braced herself for criticism, but instead, the woman looked almost apologetic. "Your Royal Highness, I must admit that I was among those who initially felt your actions were inappropriate. However, upon reflection and after reviewing the outcome, I believe I was wrong. What you demonstrated was not a lack of training or understanding of protocol. What you demonstrated was the very essence of what the royal family should represent: care for the people who serve us and the wisdom to know when human life supersedes ceremony." Mrs. Pemberton paused, seeming to struggle with her next words. "I've worked for the royal family for 23 years, and in that time, I've become too focused on image and tradition. You reminded me, and I think all of us, why the royal family exists in the first place. Not to perform ceremonies perfectly, but to serve and care for the people of this nation." Charlotte felt tears welling up again. She seemed to cry a lot these days, but these were good tears, happy tears. Her father placed a hand on her shoulder. "Charlotte, we're also making another change. From now on, all royal children will receive training in basic first aid and emergency response. You acted on instinct and compassion, which is wonderful, but we want to ensure you and your siblings are actually equipped to help in emergency situations should they arise again." "I'd like that," Charlotte said softly. "I felt so helpless when Guard Mitchell was collapsing. I wanted to do more but didn't know how." Over the following weeks, Charlotte found herself becoming something of a celebrity, though not always in ways she enjoyed. People recognized her when she went out in public, which didn't happen often. Other children at her school, a small private academy attended by children of diplomats and nobles, treated her differently. Some seemed in awe of her, while others acted jealous. The first aid training began, and Charlotte threw herself into it with enthusiasm. She learned CPR on practice dummies, how to recognize the signs of various medical emergencies, and what to do in different crisis situations. Her brothers joined her for the lessons, though they didn't seem quite as interested as she was. Charlotte found herself taking notes and asking the instructor questions long after the official lesson time ended. Guard Mitchell was recovering well, according to the updates she received. He'd had surgery to place stents in his blocked arteries and was undergoing cardiac rehabilitation. The doctor said he was doing better than expected, partly because they'd caught the heart attack so early and treated it so quickly. He sent Charlotte a thank you card with a pressed flower in it, which she kept on her bedside table. One afternoon, about a month after the incident, Charlotte was in the palace garden reading when her private secretary approached with an unusual request. "Your Royal Highness, there's a group here to see you. They've been given permission by your parents. It's a delegation from the National Heart Foundation." Charlotte looked up from her book, confused. "What do they want?" "They'd like to speak with you about becoming a youth ambassador for heart health awareness. Given what happened with Guard Mitchell and the attention it received, they believe you could help spread important information about recognizing heart attack symptoms and the importance of quick action." Charlotte thought about this. She was only 8 years old. Could she really be an ambassador for something so important? But then she thought about Guard Mitchell and how close he'd come to dying. If her story could help other people recognize when someone was having a heart attack, maybe she could save more lives. "I'll meet with them," she decided. The meeting was held in one of the palace's smaller sitting rooms. 4 people from the Heart Foundation came, including a doctor, a survivor of a heart attack, and 2 people who worked on public education campaigns. They were all very kind and spoke to Charlotte like she was an adult, not a child, which she appreciated. The doctor explained that heart disease was the leading cause of death in the country, but many deaths were preventable if people recognized the symptoms early and got help quickly. The survivor, a woman named Mrs. Davies, shared her own story of having a heart attack while shopping and how a stranger's quick action to call for help had saved her life. "What you did, Princess Charlotte," Mrs. Davies said, "is what we want everyone to do. You noticed something was wrong, you spoke up even when it was difficult, and you made sure help arrived quickly. Those 3 actions saved Guard Mitchell's life, and they're the same actions that could save thousands of lives every year if more people knew what to look for." The foundation wanted to create a campaign called "See Something, Say Something, Save Someone," based on Charlotte's actions. They wanted to use her story, with her permission, to teach people about heart attack symptoms and the importance of acting quickly. They also wanted her to appear in some public service announcements and perhaps visit schools to talk about her experience. Charlotte looked at her parents, who had sat quietly through the meeting. Her father gave her a small nod, indicating the decision was hers to make. "Will it really help people?" Charlotte asked. "We believe it will," the foundation director assured her. "Your story has already raised awareness about heart health more than any campaign we've done in the past decade. If we can harness that attention and use it educationally, we could genuinely save lives." Charlotte thought about Guard Mitchell lying in that hospital bed, thanking her for noticing when others hadn't. She thought about Mrs. Davies and her story of being saved by a stranger. She thought about all the people who might have heart attacks in the future and how maybe, just maybe, someone might recognize the symptoms because of something she'd helped teach them. "Okay," she said firmly. "I'll do it, but I don't want it to be about me being brave or special. I want it to be about how anyone can save a life if they just pay attention and act quickly. That's the important part." The campaign launched 2 months later. Charlotte appeared in television spots that aired during popular programs, talking about the importance of recognizing heart attack symptoms. The advertisements were simple and direct. They showed footage from the ceremony, then Charlotte explaining what she'd noticed. The pale face, the sweating, the hand moving to the chest, the unsteady stance. "I'm just a kid," Charlotte said in one advertisement, looking directly at the camera. "I don't have medical training, but I paid attention, and I spoke up even when it felt awkward. That's all it takes sometimes. Pay attention to the people around you. If something seems wrong, say something. You might save a life." The campaign was remarkably successful. The Heart Foundation reported a significant increase in calls to their information helpline. More people were learning CPR. Emergency rooms reported that heart attack patients were arriving earlier in their episodes, suggesting that family members and bystanders were recognizing symptoms more quickly. Charlotte also began visiting schools as part of the campaign. She would talk to students about her experience and what she'd learned since then. She was always nervous before these visits, worried she would say something wrong or that the other children would think she was showing off. But the visits usually went well. Kids asked good questions and seemed genuinely interested in learning about emergency response. At one school in a working-class neighborhood of London, a boy about Charlotte's age raised his hand during the question period. My dad had a heart attack last year, he said quietly. He didn't want to go to the hospital because he said he was probably just tired from work. My mom had to force him to go. The doctor said he was lucky she did. Charlotte nodded. That's actually really common. A lot of people, especially men, don't want to admit something might be seriously wrong. They think they're being tough by ignoring symptoms. But the tough thing, the brave thing, is admitting you need help and getting it quickly. She paused, then added, Is your dad okay now? The boy smiled. Yeah, he's good. He had to change his diet and he complains about it all the time, but he's here. That's wonderful, Charlotte said sincerely. Tell him a princess says he should stop complaining about his healthy food. The children laughed and the tension in the room eased. These were the moments Charlotte loved, when she could connect with regular kids and talk about real things that mattered. Meanwhile, Guard Mitchell was making excellent progress in his recovery. After 3 months, his doctors cleared him to return to light duties at the palace. He couldn't stand for long periods or do the physically demanding aspects of guard duty, but he was assigned to work in the security office, helping coordinate schedules and train younger guards. Charlotte made sure to visit him regularly in his new office. They developed an unlikely friendship, this 8-year-old princess and the 63-year-old guard. He would tell her stories about his years of service, about the funny things that happened behind the scenes at royal events, about the history of the palace guard. She would tell him about her school projects, her first aid training, and the campaign work she was doing. One day, about 4 months after the incident, Guard Mitchell had a surprise for Charlotte. I've been working on something, he said, pulling out a leather-bound journal. I've written down all the important lessons I've learned in my 32 years of service. I was going to keep it for my grandchildren, but I think you should have it. You're going to be a leader someday, Charlotte. These might help you. Charlotte accepted the journal reverently, running her fingers over the smooth leather cover. Are you sure? These are your memories, I'm sure, he said. And besides, I've made copies. Can't teach these old fingers to use a computer, but I can use a photocopier well enough. She laughed and hugged him carefully, mindful of his still healing heart. Thank you. I'll treasure this. That evening, Charlotte sat in her room reading through the journal. Guard Mitchell's handwriting was neat and precise, just like everything else about him. The lessons ranged from practical advice about security procedures to deeper wisdom about service and duty. One entry particularly struck her. The highest form of service is not standing at attention for hours without moving. It's not wearing a uniform perfectly or following every rule precisely. The highest form of service is caring enough about the people you serve to see them as individuals, to recognize when they need help, and to provide it regardless of personal cost or social convention. Below this, he'd added a note. I learned this from an 8-year-old princess who broke protocol to save my life. Charlotte felt tears sliding down her cheeks as she read. She carefully closed the journal and placed it on her bedside table, next to the pressed flower he'd sent her months ago. The following week brought another surprise. Charlotte was invited to a special ceremony at the palace, but nobody would tell her what it was about. Her mother helped her dress in a formal outfit, fussing over her hair more than usual. Her brothers were also dressed formally, which meant this was something significant. When they entered the throne room, Charlotte was surprised to see it filled with palace guards, both active and retired. Guard Mitchell stood near the front, also in his dress uniform. He looked so much healthier than he had at that terrible ceremony months ago. His color was good, and he stood straight and proud. Her father began to speak. Today we are here to recognize exceptional service and courage. Not the courage shown in battle or through years of dedicated service, though we honor those as well. Today, we recognize a different kind of courage. The courage to break with tradition when human life is at stake. The courage to act when others hesitate. The courage to see people, truly see them, when it would be easier to look away. Charlotte realized with a start that this ceremony was about her. Her cheeks flushed and she looked down at her shoes, suddenly feeling shy with all these people staring at her. Her father continued, Princess Charlotte, please step forward. Charlotte walked slowly to where her father stood. Her legs felt shaky, but she kept her head up. When she reached him, he smiled down at her warmly. It is my honor to present you with the Royal Humane Society Medal for saving the life of Guard James Mitchell. This medal has been awarded for over 200 years to individuals who risk their own safety or position to save others. You are the youngest person to ever receive it. He placed a medal on a ribbon around her neck. The medal was heavy and cool against her chest. Charlotte looked up at her father with wide eyes, hardly believing this was happening. Furthermore, her father continued, the palace guard has voted unanimously to make you an honorary guard. This is an extremely rare honor, and you are the first child to ever receive it. Guard Mitchell stepped forward, carrying a small version of the red guard uniform on a cushion. It was perfectly sized for Charlotte, complete with miniature medals and insignia. The room erupted in applause, and Charlotte saw many of the guards smiling at her with genuine warmth and respect. Guard Mitchell leaned down and whispered, "You're one of us now, Your Royal Highness. You've proven you have the heart of a true guardian." The ceremony concluded with a reception where Charlotte met many of the guards she'd only ever seen standing at attention outside palace doors. They were funny and kind, telling her stories and joking with her like she was a regular person. She learned that many of them had families, hobbies, and lives completely separate from their formal duties. She'd never really thought about that before, about the full lives these people led beyond their uniforms. One elderly retired guard approached her, his chest covered in medals from actual military service. "Young lady," he said gruffly, "I served in 3 wars and thought I'd seen every kind of courage. But what you did took a different kind of bravery. You risked embarrassment, criticism, and your family's disapproval to help someone. That's harder than facing enemy fire, in my opinion." Charlotte didn't know what to say to that, so she just thanked him quietly. As the weeks passed, life slowly returned to normal, or as normal as it could be for a princess who'd become a national symbol of compassion. Charlotte went back to her regular school schedule, her riding lessons, her piano practice. But something had fundamentally changed in how she saw her role as a member of the royal family. She paid more attention now. Not just to people who might be in medical distress, but to everyone around her. She noticed the palace maid who seemed sad and learned her mother was ill. She noticed the chef who limped and discovered he had an old injury that pained him. She noticed everything, and she tried to help where she could, even in small ways. Her parents noticed the change too. Her mother commented one evening, "You've become more observant, Charlotte. More thoughtful." "I'm trying to see people," Charlotte explained. "Really see them, not just look at them." "There's a difference." Her mother hugged her tightly. "Yes, there is. And it's a lesson many adults never learn." 6 months after the incident, Guard Mitchell was cleared to return to full duties. The doctor said his recovery had been remarkable, partly due to how quickly he'd received treatment. On his first day back in his red uniform, standing guard outside the palace, Charlotte made a point of walking past him. She couldn't speak to him while he was on duty. That would be breaking protocol in a way that served no purpose. But A year had passed since that dramatic ceremony, when Charlotte saved Guard Mitchell's life. The anniversary brought renewed media attention, with newspapers running retrospective articles about how one child's compassion had sparked national conversations about emergency response, royal protocol, and what true leadership meant. Charlotte, now 9 years old, handled the attention with much more grace than she had initially. She'd learned how to speak to journalists, how to stay focused on the important message rather than getting distracted by questions about her personal life. The Heart Foundation campaign she'd been part of was being credited with saving an estimated 70 lives over the past year. People who'd recognized heart attack symptoms in others and acted quickly because of the awareness the campaign had raised. The palace had arranged a special anniversary event, but this time it was very different from the formal ceremony a year ago. Instead of speeches and rigid protocol, they'd organized a community health fair in the palace gardens. The public was invited to attend, and various health organizations set up booths teaching CPR, healthy eating, exercise, and disease prevention. Charlotte spent the day walking through the fair with Guard Mitchell at her side. He'd volunteered to be her escort for the event, and she couldn't have asked for better company. They stopped at each booth and Charlotte tried everything. She practiced CPR on the training dummies until her arms ached. She learned how to check someone's pulse properly. She even tried the healthy cooking demonstrations, though she admitted the vegetables tasted better than they looked. At one booth, a woman in her 50s approached Charlotte nervously. "Your Royal Highness, I wanted to thank you. My husband had a heart attack 3 months ago, and I recognized the symptoms because of your campaign. The doctors said we got him to the hospital just in time. He's recovering well now." Charlotte felt that familiar warmth in her chest, the feeling she got whenever she heard stories like this. "I'm so glad he's okay. How are you doing?" It must have been scary. The woman looked surprised that Charlotte asked about her well-being. It was terrifying, honestly. But I knew what to look for, and I knew not to wait. Your message about acting quickly, even if you're not sure, that's what made me call for help right away instead of waiting to see if he got better. They talked for several more minutes, and Charlotte learned about the woman's husband, their grandchildren, and their plans for the future now that he was recovering. When the woman left, she had tears in her eyes but was smiling. Guard Mitchell watched this interaction thoughtfully. You have a gift, you know, not just for noticing when people need medical help, but for making people feel seen and heard. That's rare, especially in someone so young. You helped teach me that, Charlotte reminded him. You and everyone else who took the time to explain things to me instead of just telling me to follow rules. As the afternoon wore on, Charlotte found herself exhausted, but happy. She'd shaken hundreds of hands, listened to dozens of stories, and learned so much about health and wellness. But more than that, she'd connected with real people, heard their stories, and understood how much difference one person's actions could make. Toward the end of the event, her father made a brief speech announcing a new initiative. The palace would be funding emergency response training in schools across the country. Every child would learn basic first aid, how to recognize common medical emergencies, and how to call for help. The program would be called the Charlotte Initiative, though Charlotte had asked them not to name it after her. Her father had overruled her gently, pointing out that her name would help the program get attention and funding. My daughter taught me something important a year ago, her father said to the assembled crowd. She taught me that compassion cannot wait for permission, that sometimes doing the right thing means breaking the rules, that seeing people as human beings worthy of help and dignity matters more than any ceremony or protocol. These are lessons I hope all of us, and especially our young people, will take to heart. The crowd applauded, and Charlotte felt her cheeks warm with embarrassment and pride mixed together. She caught Guard Mitchell's eye, and he gave her a subtle thumbs up that made her smile. That evening, after all the guests had left and the palace grounds were quiet again, Charlotte found herself back in the garden where she'd been reading when the Heart Foundation had first approached her. So much had changed in a year. She'd gone from being just another royal child to someone recognized nationally. She'd learned about emergency medicine, public speaking, and the weight of being a symbol for something larger than herself. But the most important thing she'd learned was something simpler and deeper. She'd learned that every person mattered, every life was valuable, and that sometimes the most important thing you could do was simply pay attention and care enough to act. Her mother found her there as the sun was setting. There you are. I've been looking for you. How are you feeling about everything? Tired, Charlotte admitted. But good tired. Happy tired. Her mother sat down on the bench beside her. I've been thinking about that day a year ago. I was so worried about how things looked, about what people would think. I tried to stop you from helping Guard Mitchell because I was more concerned with appearances than with his well-being. That shames me now. You were just doing what you thought was right, Charlotte said generously. You'd been trained to think that way your whole life. Perhaps, her mother agreed. But you weren't trained to ignore someone in distress, and you didn't. You acted on instinct and compassion. I hope your brothers and all the children in this country learn from your example, rather than from the example I set that day. They sat together in comfortable silence for a while, watching the evening sky turn from blue to purple to deep navy. Stars began appearing one by one, tiny points of light in the darkness. Do you ever regret it? Her mother asked finally. All the attention, the responsibility, the way your life changed. Charlotte thought about this seriously. There had been difficult moments, certainly. Times when she wished she could just be a normal child without everyone watching and judging her actions. Times when the pressure felt heavy and overwhelming. But then she thought about Guard Mitchell's smile, about the woman whose husband she'd helped save, about all the people learning CPR and first aid because of the attention her actions had received. No, she said firmly, I don't regret it. Guard Mitchell is alive because I paid attention and acted. Other people are alive because my story made them more aware. If I could go back and choose differently, I wouldn't. I'd do exactly the same thing. Her mother hugged her close. You're going to be a remarkable queen someday, Charlotte. Not because you'll wear a crown or follow protocol perfectly, but because you lead with your heart and you see people. Really see them. Later that night, Charlotte added another entry to the journal Guard Mitchell had given her. She wrote about the anniversary event, about the stories she'd heard, about the lives that had been saved. She wrote about her conversation with her mother and her certainty that she'd made the right choice a year ago. She ended with a reflection that surprised even herself. Today, someone asked me if I was proud of myself for what I did. I said yes, but I realized later that pride isn't quite the right word. I'm grateful. Grateful that I was paying attention that day. Grateful that I had the courage to act. Grateful that Guard Mitchell survived. Grateful for everything that came after. Maybe gratitude is better than pride. Pride is about yourself. Gratitude is about recognizing all the people and circumstances that made something possible. I'm grateful for all of it. As Charlotte got ready for bed that night, she looked at the honorary guard uniform hanging in her closet and the Royal Humane Society medal on her dresser. These were symbols of recognition, certainly, but they were also reminders of responsibility. They reminded her that she'd been given a platform and attention, and she had an obligation to use it well. She thought about the future, about the years ahead when she'd be older and have even more influence and responsibility. She promised herself that she would never forget the lessons of this past year, that she would continue paying attention, continue caring, continue acting when action was needed. In another part of the palace, Guard Mitchell was finishing his evening shift. Before leaving, he stopped by the security office and pulled out his own copy of the journal he'd given Charlotte. He added a new entry about the anniversary event, about watching Charlotte interact with people, about how proud he was of the young woman she was becoming. He wrote, "A year ago today, a little girl saved my life. But in doing so, she saved more than just me. She reminded an entire nation what true leadership looks like. She sparked conversations that needed to happen. She changed policies that needed changing. And she did it all simply by caring enough to notice when someone needed help. If I'd known that standing in that ceremony would lead to all this good, I'd have had that heart attack on purpose. Though perhaps that's not something I should say out loud. The point is, sometimes the worst moments lead to the best outcomes. And sometimes the smallest person in the room is the one with the biggest heart and the clearest vision. I served the royal family for over 30 years before that day, but I'm more honored to serve them now knowing